So, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of In Conversation With. My name is John Lunn, aka Jonnychipz, and in this video series, we talk all things cloud with experts and advocates from right across our industry, covering a wide variety of topics, from skills and careers through to technical overviews and softer skills. So, whether you're watching this on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, or LinkedIn, thanks so much for tuning in. It really is appreciated. Please do take part in the chat below. Drop us a comment, a like, and a subscribe is really appreciated. Okay, so my next guest is an Azure Data Platform consultant at Data High at the moment. He's a Microsoft MVP, a blogger, a public speaker. He's got a huge passion for data analytics. So based out of Milton Keynes in the UK, I'm thrilled to welcome my next guest on In Conversation With, Mr. Andy Cutler. Hey, Andy, how you doing? Thanks for joining me.
Hello, John. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. Not at all. Thanks for giving your time up and coming on and, hopefully schooling me a little bit today on data platform. But yeah, like I say, thanks for giving up your time, Andy. We've got some cool areas to talk through now over the next half an hour or so. But I guess before we jump in, do you want to give yourself a little bit of a broader introduction and I guess kind of give us that potted history as to how you've ended up in the position that you're in at the moment? That'd be cool.
Yes. Thanks, John. Data. Well, so this all started, I'm going to say, over 20 years ago. So I was a web developer, hand cranking HTML and I think CSS, at the time to get some websites out. And we got in a SQL Server 2000 license because what we wanted to do is we wanted to build CMS systems, content driven systems. And, I got at the time, I would consider lumbered with the challenge of understanding SQL, creating the tables and the stored procedures and the logic to deliver the content to the website. And I got quite into it, and also it almost seemed a little bit like a dark art as well. Yeah. So everybody was talking about web development and web design. And yeah, there was this undercurrent of data and SQL Server. So then my next role, I got more involved on the data side of things. And ultimately, I was asked by, my boss at the time, would I mind shadowing a consultant who was doing a MicroStrategy and data warehouse project. Because, he was very concerned that, yes, this consultant's coming in. Yes, he's going to be creating these things called cubes and this thing called a dimensional model with facts and dimensions in a SQL database, and was worried that, once the consultant left, who was going to look after it? Okay, so everything I'd learned up to that point, when you're taught in data about the concepts of normal form, where you're building a relational data model and you're told, don't repeat data, make sure that data is unique, so that you can optimize it as much as possible. And then I was being told by this consultant, what we do is we take all the data from the tables here and we join it all together and we do something called denormalization and we repeat all this data. Yeah. And ultimately that ends up in a report as, report headings that you can create reports from. Yeah. So it just opened up this whole world of data and analytics that I just ran with. I just loved it. And at the time, yes, I was working a little bit with MicroStrategy and data warehousing, but then over time, I started to go into other visualization tools like Tableau, and then Power BI. Once Power BI had got to a stage where it was front and center in terms of, you know, data modeling and data visualization platforms. You know, that's where I've been for quite a lot of the time on the data modeling and visualization side. And then obviously on the data platform side, you know, I've gone from SQL Server, which is still, you know, I'm doing a project at the moment with SQL Server, you know, but for the last, I'd say 6 years, you know, I've been quite heavily involved in Azure as well.
Okay.
So, you know, a project at the time, you know, 6 years ago, working with, well, what it's called now is Synapse Analytics. Part of that service a few years ago was called Azure SQL Data Warehouse.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So
I vaguely remember those terms. Yeah. I vaguely remember the names.
Yeah. I've been told off by Microsoft for, you know, for using that name now when I talk about, you know, Synapse Analytics. You know, get a bit of a slap wrist and told, you know, use the current name.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, so bringing those concepts of SQL Server into the cloud, taking some features away that are not really relevant to those kind of massive, scalable data platforms. So where I am now is, for the last couple of years, I've really been working for myself. You know? Okay. So I created, you know, Data High, my little one-person band. Really, you got to start from somewhere, right? You got to
absolutely
grow it from somewhere. You know, so as I said, you know, I'm, you know, working on a project at the moment where I'm, you know, building, you know, greenfield data warehouse project, which is, you know, really good. So you get quite involved in the data modeling side of things, you know, and as you know, I touched on earlier about, you know, dimensional modeling. You know, always lots of conversations that go on about the relevancy of that process. Yeah. Okay. And, you know, what does it bring to businesses today versus, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago? So there's always conversations, you know, around the relevancy of that on Twitter, which is, you know, great. You know, the more things get talked about, you know, the more people can dive in and understand those concepts.
Sure.
So that's where I am really in terms of what I've been doing with my work up till now, really.
No, I mean, and that's pretty cool. Like, you know, to me personally, data is one of those areas. I said before we hit record, I probably know enough to be dangerous. And I guess it's like any discipline. The more focused you become, the more ingrained you become in those areas, the more you're going to learn and the deeper that you're going to go with the technology. And I guess for you, Andy, the way things have gone with this gradual shift to the cloud over the last 10, nearly 12, nearly 15 years, I guess, to a certain extent. But certainly over the last few years, it seems that we've got this exponential rise to want to shift to the cloud. Now, when we look at data, like as an infrastructure person, to me, that's a case of, okay, we've got VMs and services running databases. We need to physically hold and store that service somewhere. Then we need to put the data somewhere as well for that service to run off. I mean, when it comes to analytics, it's almost like a little bit of a black box. I mean, is there a simple way of explaining? You've got a whole bunch of applications running off various different databases, whether they're relational databases or document databases, and you want to do some data modeling for a business across a number of applications. How do all of these components kind of glue together, Andy? Have you got a simple way that I say simple, a way of explaining, you know, maybe in layman's terms, how some of these features and functionalities fit together to get up into something like an Azure Synapse workspace, or you know, do some data factory engineering to that data? What is that? Does that make sense, Andy?
It does. And what I'll do is I'll go back to the past a little bit to then come forward and answer that, because you know, when you're, you know, creating, let's say, and you know, we're going to focus on Microsoft, you know, technology.
Yeah, of course.
Really, but with, you know, let's say SQL Server. Okay, so you're creating a new infrastructure, let's say from scratch. You know, it's on premise. You know, let's say it was 10 years ago, even, you know, 5 years ago. even now you're creating a SQL Server infrastructure. There are very definite components, within that installation of SQL Server that do very specific things. Okay. And usually your, best practices is, okay, you've got to install, the main database engine on one server, and then another server can house the integration, so the data integration processes, and then another server for the analytics and reporting processes. Yeah. So very, very, driven from each of these components and being installed on, on these servers.
Yeah.
Go to the cloud, and what we have now is very discrete services that do very specific things. So we've got our stores to hold our data. We've got our tools to do the transformation and loading of that data. We've got options in terms of how we then load into analytical stores, visualize that data. So with something like Synapse, what Microsoft have done is they broke out all of these services into, these discrete components. So, for example, yes, we talked about, SQL Data Warehouse. That was your relational database in the cloud, to store your data, have your, SQL to do your transformation of your data as well. And then you had Data Factory, which is for your, extracting your data from, 100 different sources, doing the transformation, loading that into the destination. You had storage systems, so data lake for bringing all of your different types and sizes of data, and Power BI. Yeah, so you've got your data modeling, your data visualization side of things, all very discrete, components.
Sure.
So then Microsoft have said, okay, well, you know what? Let's bring those components together into one set of services. Okay. And then we'll put the umbrella term of Synapse Analytics over the top.
Right.
So
with you.
In essence, when you're coming to Synapse Analytics to understand what it is all of the things to do with data integration. Yeah. So it has Data Factory within it called pipelines. Okay. So if you've got data in your on-premise systems, your SaaS systems, any of these systems that pipelines and Data Factory supports, you've got various different ways of transforming that data and then loading that data to data lake storage accounts, to what they now call dedicated SQL pools, which is the data warehouse service, and also to integrate Power BI into Synapse Analytics as well. So they've kind of wrapped it all in a nice bow for people to get an end-to-end data analytics and warehousing solution set up.
So I'm right in thinking then things like that. So if you do have this bunch of, services that have been around for 10 years, on-prem, private data center, running various databases, you can effectively start to transfer that data. So leave the application running against those services as it currently is, but then extract that data from those systems into something like Synapse to do further analytics. I'm right in thinking that's the way that you could work with data?
Yes. So we've got a couple of interesting areas in that, yes, that whole concept of, look, you've got your source systems, they're doing what they're designed to do. They're highly transactional, they're reading and writing data constantly. And we need to be able to hook in, get that data out, batch driven, maybe some real-time data that's coming into some of our real-time streaming endpoints in Azure as well. But yeah, so being able to offload the analytics to separate data stores, concepts, that concept of warehousing, that has been relevant for 30 years, 30, 40 years is still relevant now. Yeah, we've got to take that data from those sources. We've got to, archive them, ensure that we've got records of that data, and then transforming it into what we need for downstream reporting, for machine learning, and also for dashboarding as well. Providing that kind of snapshot of how things are going. But also, some of this new technology is allowing you to tap into those applications when data is being generated as well. So one of the services in Synapse Analytics that I blog and talk about a lot is serverless SQL pools. Which is, again, it's a SQL service, right? It's just a SQL service, but it doesn't actually hold any data itself. So it doesn't have its own data store. So there's nothing to import in, but it can connect to source systems. It can connect to Cosmos DB, for example. So Cosmos DB is that sort of highly transactional document store. Serverless can tap into that and query directly the data in those systems. And with Dynamics as well, Dynamics, it has the Dataverse. So the data model that underpins part of the Dynamics infrastructure and Power BI. Again, you're able to kind of tap into that data and report on it. So we've got that kind of convergence of being able to extract data, but also get at data in its source as well.
And that's pretty cool. And I guess that's the shift to the cloud is enabling that to a certain extent with the accessibility to the infrastructure or the services that will allow some of those things. And I'm presuming, Andy, that's the world that you're living in at the moment then, is where you're bringing that data into something like Synapse Analytics. You're doing some of that extract from source systems. And am I right in thinking then that you would use your skills and your knowledge to kind of maybe even join systems together to transform data into some kind of a format that can then be onwardly used, like you say, for machine learning or visualization? Is that, I mean, look, I'm probably speaking very, very layman's terms here and very high level, but is that the general concept as to what's going on from a cloud-based data platform, extract, load, transform kind of thing?
Yes. So again, we go back to those tools and processes which we can use to connect to all of those different data sources. I mean, yes, these are Microsoft products, but they connect to all sorts of non-Microsoft products as well.
Sure.
If a vendor is exposing endpoints and APIs, hey, you can probably go and get some data from it.
Yeah, with you.
So whereas, from an on-premises perspective, when companies are looking to build that data warehousing or analytics system that is bringing together all sorts of different data from different systems, more often than not, those systems are their on-premise systems as well. They might have some integration points to get some data out of, any systems they're using, any web-based systems they're using, but they're still going to be using that kind of on-premises pipeline. The cloud, and being able to have those stores in the cloud and those services in the cloud that connect to all those other different vendors, is that an organization that has their own line of business applications with their transactional data in, they're going to be covered. You're going to be able to extract data from those systems. Vendors that they're working with, so they could have CRM platforms. Again, there's a good chance that you're going to be able to extract data from those systems as well. So it gives them a lot more flexibility to go and get the data that's relevant to them.
It's a great transition, and I guess it's just dropping that barrier to entry for people to try some of these things and to learn some of these things. On which note, we were joking there about kind of the naming of certain services with Microsoft marketing coming on and badging a service up with a new name. That in itself can create confusion, and all of a sudden you think, wow, is there something else I need to learn? And I'm guessing it's no different in the data world, Andy. On that front, it seems to be a common theme. What do you do to kind of stay on top of these learnings? Because there's, we just described there over the last 10 minutes or so a very high level process for getting data from, on-prem systems into a cloud-based platform to do some further transform and analytics. How do you stay on top of all these new features and functionality that's getting released from Microsoft on a weekly basis at the moment? Have you got any good hints or tips there?
Yeah, so you actually touched on a good point about the weekly releases. It almost feels like daily.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you went,
yeah.
you went, we've all gone from that period of time in which you had major and minor releases of products, but they were a certain number of months and years apart.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and simply because for a company like Microsoft to package up and distribute installable software, there's a lot more consideration to that. Yeah, so being able to release things on a daily and monthly basis was probably you're not going to be able to do it. Also, people being on all sorts of different versions is going to cause a lot of chaos. Obviously, with services in the cloud, they have full control over what version people are running. So everyone can essentially be running the same version with the same functionality, and it makes it easier for them. But for the rest of us, trying to keep up with those features it is tricky. One of the things is Microsoft have been much better at doing this, is that there are certain Microsoft people, actually people who work for Microsoft, the program managers that tweet out new features. Okay. So and keep blogs updated and do videos as well. And those three things are probably enough to keep yourself updated. So what Microsoft are doing a lot more now is a lot more community engagement. Okay. So for example, with Synapse Analytics, they now have a monthly update. Okay. So they'll blog and they'll write about, here's a new feature for this. Here's a new feature for this. Here's the documentation for this, for this, for this. They'll have a video. So they've got a video now. And they've started to tweet as well. Yeah. Before that, it was very much dependent on knowing who in the community was on top of these products and services themselves.
Okay.
Now, for me, on a daily basis, I am keeping myself up to date with what's new, because then, I feel like I should contribute to people knowing what's new by blogging, by tweeting, by keeping people updated. So, they're headed in the right direction in keeping everybody up to date with these services, because yes, you can pick and choose. You can say, right, well, I'm working primarily with Synapse, so I need to target, these blogs to keep myself updated with what's new, or, I'm targeting Azure Databricks. So, these individuals, they're keeping up to date with, with what's going on, on that side as well. So that's really from, let's say, the community and vendors perspective in how I keep, myself updated.
I'm going to say absolutely. And one of the other things we were obviously talking about is, again, I'm guessing data is no different in terms of certification, but Microsoft seem to now, they've got this very broad set of certification. And for me personally, in the past, when there's something, or an area, I should say, of Azure as a platform that I'm not quite sure of, or 365, I'll sometimes focus on the fundamental certs and kind of learn the basics and push my way through. And it's one of those things, you kind of know a little bit about lots of things as you go through the industry over the years, but it kind of helps guide you. I mean, is the data side of Azure, with things that are going on at the moment, have you got the similar kind of concepts with the examinations? Have they started to kind of give out more granular focused certifications?
Yeah, it's a good point. And actually, one of the best points you touched on was that, well, fundamentals, right? Is getting an understanding of another area in Azure that you might not be familiar with, but done in a way that it's not going to overwhelm you. So, like with the other Azure products and services, data has got its own fundamentals. So you can take the Azure data fundamentals, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can come at it from an infrastructure perspective, a security perspective. Yeah, an Azure security engineer might want to understand, well, what data services are available that I would need to be aware of when designing my solution to make sure everything is secure, and contained. So certainly, the data side of things, it has its fundamentals, which is a great way of not just gaining a certification and getting that badge, but also looking at those skills measured and being able to pick out those services that Microsoft is saying, hey, these are data services, you should know a little bit about these. So they have that fundamentals, which is really good. And then they start to break out into the different areas. So there is the Azure Data Engineering certification. So anyone who is coming to Azure and wanting to use those cloud data analytics services like Synapse, then the data engineering certification goes into a lot more detail. It goes into a lot more detail of all those components of Synapse, including importing and transforming data, serving that data, configuring your data lake. So it goes into a lot of sort of fine-grained detail on that. And then you've got the more Power BI side of things. So I think 18 months ago, maybe couple of years ago, maybe, there was a Power BI data analyst specific certification, which was great.
I spotted that.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic for people coming from the Power BI world to be able to look at a set of skills measured from Microsoft and say, okay, so these are the things that Microsoft are saying, I should know to be, a Power BI data analyst. So people could come and do that certification. And that was great. Yeah. So, but you could see you've got two sides. You've got data engineering and you've got the data analyst.
Sure thing.
So what's quite interesting recently is that in the last sort of 2-3 weeks, Microsoft have announced a new certification. And they've announced an Azure Enterprise Data Analyst.
Okay.
And what's quite interesting is it certainly piqued, my interest, is that they've taken some of the world of data engineering, just a light touch, not too much, some of that world there, some of the world of the data analyst, and sort of converged them into one certification and one exam as well.
Interesting.
So and what's also interesting is this enterprise. So the word enterprise is littered quite a lot through that certification because it's about being experienced in Power BI, but being knowledgeable in how you use Power BI with some of those large scale analytics systems in Synapse Analytics. And from a role perspective, it's almost like a new role is being created as well, where an organization can actually say, okay, well, we've got the world of the data analysts, we've got the world of the data engineers. We need a role in the middle that can facilitate between the both of them, make sure each of those main areas are mindful of the integration between those technologies. So, and again, sort of keeping yourself up to date, if you go through those skills measured, which is a document that Microsoft, produces against every certification, and you can have a look through that list and say, oh, okay, so I'll need to know how to use the data governance system Purview, or I'm going to need to know the difference between the various engines within Synapse. So it then provides you a great list of the things that Microsoft have said, hey, these are the things that you should know if you work, if you work in data analysis or data engineering from an enterprise perspective. So I find that really, really interesting.
It's cool that you pointed that out, because I'm just looking now online, and that's the DP500 exam. It looks like that's in beta at the moment. That's the one that you're talking about, Andy.
Yeah, I think in about 3 weeks, I think it comes out. It comes into beta. Sorry.
Yeah, it says here available mid-April. I mean, it's really interesting you brought this up, because one of the things I was going to say is that, certainly from my perspective, coming from that operations and that infrastructure world, is that when we shifted to cloud, there was a lot of blurred lines. There was a lot of overlap with roles and responsibilities, what you might traditionally have expected one kind of discipline to take care of. All of a sudden now, actually, is that down to me because I'm kind of putting infrastructure in the cloud? I'm now responsible for setting up networks, for argument's sake, because I can. It's those kind of things. And I'm sensing it's very similar in the data world, where you've got these, and I guess it's similar from the infrastructure and data world, as well as an analyst and the data engineer world. It's almost like our roles are becoming very fluid. Is that fair to say? Do you see it like that, Andy, or do you see a different way from the data perspective?
You know what? That's a really, really interesting point. So let's take my own experience and expertise. So yes, I work with Synapse Analytics and SQL Server, and yes, I work with Power BI. Okay, so that's the headline, right? That's the front page headline. Andy works with Power BI and Synapse and SQL Server. Yeah. But if you actually broke it down on the Power BI side, I am very, very light on, let's say, the visualization aspect, the reporting aspect. There are so many people out there that they take the Power BI modeling and visualization concepts, and they just take it to an absolute unbelievable next level. With visual, with ways and means of not just reporting the data, but telling the story of the data as well. Sure. Whereas for me, I'm charts, graphs, and some tables, right? I'm getting that information as simply as possible. What I concentrate mostly with Power BI is, yes, those integrations with the systems, is trying to make sure that when I'm loading Power BI, I'm trying to do it as efficiently as possible. Okay. And that in itself is a big area. And organizations, they're going to have the same thing, of a certain size. They will have people who are going to be much more focused on the analysis side of things and be very heavy, very knowledgeable, and could even bring their Python and R expertise into Power BI. And then you're going to have those people that maybe do a little bit of that Power BI work, but they do a lot of administration, governance, ways and means in which of working with the downstream data sources. So there is, and I think that fluidity is probably driven by how big these platforms are as well. Okay, so when you talk about Power BI, it's largely recognized now that you can't be an expert in Power BI, because there's a lot within that platform itself. There's a lot of governance, there's a lot of administration, analysis, data modeling, data shaping. Yeah. And these have created roles in and of themselves.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's definitely fair to say that as with any other part of the technical industry, data is, data has the fluidity of those roles as well.
It's just such, I guess it's interesting, and almost it compels you to want to learn more, I guess, in those certain regards. Because if you're anything like me, Andy, you see, if I'm very much one of these people where I'm working on something that I know is my job and that's what I do, but then something happens over there that I have to kind of rub shoulders with or speak to somebody in a different area of tech, and I go, "Oh, I like what you're doing. That looks shiny." So I kind of edge in that way and think, I've got to know more. And before you know it, all of a sudden you've kind of gone off down this rabbit hole. And I guess it's trying to stay focused to a certain extent as to what the task at hand is that you need to do for your 9 to 5 or your particular project you're working on. But chatting with lots of people across the industry, the cloud industry at the moment, what you're describing seems very common across what were, I guess, the traditional disciplines in the best sense of the word that you can kind of think of. That all of a sudden now they're starting to bleed out. So I don't know, does it come down to just being, are you, how disciplined you are as an individual to how far or wide you allow yourself to go and how deep in a very specific area. It's very much, I think we mentioned before we hit record, but that T-shaped kind of discipline. Are we becoming more N or M shaped where we've have to have a number of disciplines now,
Yeah, I think, well, you touched on, if you're interested, then, and that curiosity's there, then you're probably going to have a look at it. I mean, I think just the technical integration between the platforms themselves and how easy they are to integrate has then meant that people do, oh, okay, so, I've connected to that, but I wouldn't mind learning a little bit more SQL, for example. So, maybe on the Power BI side, and the platforms are there to do that. And maybe on the data engineering side, because it's very easy to hook into Power BI, they might think, oh, I quite like building dashboards and being able to take all that raw data and provide some meaningful insight.
Yeah.
And of course, the other thing is that because of the amount of material there is out there to learn, I mean, Microsoft's own Learn platform, I honestly, I think it's amazing.
Yeah.
I really do. They've stepped up their game in terms of providing easy access to learn these things. But other so many other vendors do the same thing. They have their own universities, they have their own places of learning, because they've got the idea that if you give people the material to learn, they will use the products. The easier you make it for people to learn, the more likely they are to use those products. And people do that, and yes, it is driven by a bit of natural curiosity as well to, understand how something else works. But yeah, I mean, if you're told and you're paid, could you do this task? Then
do this one.
Do the task first, and then do the other nice things. Yeah.
It's just I don't know about you again, because I think we're in this world at the moment where, to get that next leg up for a business or any organization, they're always looking for that. What differentiates my business from my competitors? And I think we're given, as technologists, we're given this whole plethora, kit bag, this tool bag of features, functionality, things that we can do. And, not just in the data space, but of course the wider technical cloud platform that we've got to our disposal. And I think it was an interesting conversation I had about graduates coming into the industry with, do they see themselves as very, as needing to dive into a T-shaped career? How do they cater for fundamentally building a solution? Now, a solution for a company to solve a problem doesn't just cover one discipline. It covers potentially hundreds, from software development to, data stores to data transformation and reporting and presentation on developed applications, and throw in everything. And you think, how do people new into the industry actually decide where they want to work? It's such a minefield, so I suppose it's back to that naturally being inquisitive and kind of finding a meandering path and pick a problem and try and solve it as best you can. But yeah, I don't know what your take on that, Andy, is, because it's almost like we're moving away from what were traditional disciplines where we knew we could focus, but then there seems to be this very broad aspect to everything at the moment. I mean,
if you let's say you separate, let's say school education from a career, there is a big gap in the middle. Okay. And I'm not talking about universities and degrees and anything like that. I'm just simply talking about those academic, any academic institute, and then a career is there's probably a large hole in the middle about what you could do. Even some of the more data focused academic courses can end up being platforms to get you into various different data disciplines. So when people come at a career in data, I fundamentally don't think that at the stage that they're looking, that would have been necessarily set. Yeah, because their
Yeah.
interest might
Yeah.
be piqued by different areas. If
Mm-hmm.
they love that process of presenting data to a business and being close to the decisions that that business will make based on that data, then they
Mm-hmm.
can go, one route. If they get a real thrill and a real buzz of being involved in the processing of that data to get it to a place in which it will be analyzed and reported on, again, a different route in.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it is a case of having to look at the various disciplines and roles that are out there and trying to learn as much as you can about those different roles to
Mm-hmm.
see
Yeah.
which will in the cold light of day, which one is going to interest me more, which is going to buzz me more. But yeah,
It's you're so right. It's almost like that finding your feet in something, and then it takes you on, and you almost got this whole plethora, this world of stuff to look at. Now, I mean that's been a great explanation. It's kind of settled a few little points in my mind. I mean, we touched on community earlier, Andy, briefly around, obviously you reach out to community to learn and keep up to date with certain technology aspects. But I know you're involved heavily with community yourself. I mean, what have you got going on at the moment? What are you trying to help people with in your own way at the moment?
So I think I guess I'm probably primarily known as someone that chats a lot about Synapse Analytics and specifically serverless SQL pools, because I came
Okay.
at
Yeah.
it from more of a practical aspect. So a
Mm-hmm.
couple of years ago, when I was, it was actually a master's project that I was doing, and I wanted to do something around this new concept of the data lake house. Okay,
Okay.
so as you can imagine, it's essentially a portmanteau of the data lake and the data warehouse. Bringing some of the features of both of those together. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so without going into too much detail, you've got some features in the world of data warehousing, in terms of data consistency, that we desperately need to have.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got that flexibility and scalability of the data lake, and you can kind of bring those two together. So I was
Okay.
looking around to see, well, what platforms are available for me to do that on, that I could then create my project based on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I did have a little look at serverless SQL pools. Now, a couple of years ago, it wasn't, it wasn't able to be considered part of a lakehouse infrastructure because it didn't support, specific, file formats. It
Mm-hmm.
does do now and has done for a while. But I also noticed that there weren't that many blogs around serverless SQL pools. Okay. And
Okay.
I was
Yeah.
particularly interested in that technology because I'm a very much an SQL based data person. Okay.
With
Now,
you. Yeah.
things like Spark, Python, Scala, absolutely fantastic big data processing technologies that I know a tiny little bit about, but not too much. I know, you touched on this earlier. I know enough to be dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But
Yeah.
I have an appreciation of it. But I came at the serverless SQL pools technology and just thought, wow, this is really easy to just start writing SQL over data in a data lake. Why aren't people talking
Okay.
about this more?
Mm.
Okay. Now, yes, it's generally understood that it might not be, the fastest out there,
Right.
that, you're not going to get your sub-second business intelligence, tool latency that people like, but
Mm-hmm.
it's so easy to start processing that data externally. So I started to put some blogs together, some sessions together, how to integrate Power BI with serverless if you're trying to, crunch, a lot of data in your
Right.
data lake. And these things, as they do, they just grow and grow and grow, and you understand more about the product. You then start talking to some of the people that are also interested in that
Mm-hmm.
platform, some of the people in Microsoft who work on that platform as well, and they might
Yeah.
listen to what you're saying in terms of feedback. So then it kind of just grew from there. I then
Okay.
started to meet a lot of people in the community. I then started to speak a little bit more, and honestly, it's probably you found this yourself. It just snowballs. You start
Yeah, it
meeting
certainly
more
does.
and more people, and you certainly for me, start to get more buzzed about being involved.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can see you've got your blog. So that's the serverlesssql.com blog of yours that you're kind of blogging on.
Yes.
And obviously a bit shout out to your YouTube channel as well. And I'll put the links, for those watching, I'll put the links in the text below. So go and check those out. But I know you mentioned recently, we for events from a data perspective, I had a guest on not too long ago. We talked about the Data Weekender, but we had an in-person event fairly recently with SQL Bits. Did you manage to get down to that, and did you manage to get involved at all?
I did, and I wish that I just couldn't get all of the time off required to get down for the entirety of SQL Biz. I just really wish I'd done that. So so I got down there on the Wednesday afternoon, and then I spent all day Thursday there. So I helped out, which as a first time helper was a new experience for me. So sort of looking after the speaker while they're trying to get themselves in the zone of delivering. But also I found that you get a rapport as well. So you get a rapport with the speaker, with the audience, and that was that was so much fun to be able to do that. Obviously doing your job and doing your duty, but feeling part of something as well, because it's a big conference. I did speak at it as well, which, I think I did tweet out afterwards, because you know what? We've got to celebrate the successes, but also highlight so many areas sometimes in which we might fall a little short. So my session, was 20 minutes long. It sounds like a lot of time, but it actually isn't. Yeah. And I was so concentrated on providing value for money, there was too much there. Yeah. It was just too much content there. There wasn't enough, just not enough time for people to breathe. So again, a learning experience, because that's probably the first time I've spoken at an in-person event for quite a few years.
Well over 2 years. Yeah, absolutely. I echo those points just on that note alone. I think, I mean, is that just because there's so much that's gone on? It's almost like you think, well, I've got to talk about this. I've got to talk about this. And you're right. 20 minutes just boom, flies by in a flash of an eye, doesn't it?
Yeah, no. A lot goes on, and a lot of people are able to condense enough points into that time. So definitely a learning experience for me. But the overall conference itself, it was so good, just to safely get meet and greet everyone again, and get some great sessions in as well, because there's hundreds of sessions to choose from, across not just technical but non-technical, as well. So it was really, really great to get down there.
I did see some of the photos. It looked quite funky. They had some cool neon flashing lights and lots of bright colours, which
it was video game themed. Cool.
Yeah, it did seem that way. So and do you know what, Andy? It's one of those things that I say to people that I've done bits with data, as you can imagine, anybody that's been in the industry for any length of time, harping back to your start in the tech world, I guess, those kind of things in early days of the late 90s, early 2000s. But today, data in the cloud, I've got colleagues and friends that deal with that, and I go and pick their brains and ask questions, and I kind of fundamentally stay away from it. But after chatting with you, you're pushing me into another area, Andy. You got to stop speaking to all these people. It's
it's all there.
It sounds
it's all there for you.
It does. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? At the moment, as a technologist working in the industry, there are so many ways that you can go, and so many cool things you can do to build real value for businesses to solve problems. And I guess, look, maybe that takes us to our last point, Andy, to kind of pick your brains a little bit. But I can't let any guest leave this show without asking them the open-ended question of, everything you've gone through there, we're learning things at such a rapid pace. There's so many cool things that we can do at the moment in technology. But from your perspective, why are we putting ourselves through this learning experience? Where are we going? Where do you think we're going to be in the next 5 to 10 years with technology? Where are we headed, do you think, Andy?
So I see a lot of the kind of no to low code analytics. Yeah. So, I think there's quite a reasonably low barrier to entry for vendors to come in with their own perspectives on how to deliver business value from data. Yeah, because it's historically been quite a technically driven process, but obviously more and more and more the business is like, we need to shape the way that this is going, because ultimately, we're the ones asking the questions.
Yeah.
So, I definitely see quite a democratization of solutions out there. Yeah, that it's not just a case of, well, you can pick a Microsoft solution, you can pick an AWS solution or a Google solution. There's going to be those other areas in which people can take advantage of.
Yeah.
So I definitely see this, a lot more sort of business driven ways of creating data platforms. Yeah, because we are going. Power BI is a good example of kind of no to low code driven way of doing things. Although I'll probably get slapped on the wrist by the Power BI community for saying that, because obviously you can get very deep into the languages that Power BI have as well. DAX,
I think
DAX
it's accessibility, isn't it? It's like you say, it
Yes.
seems to almost enable. I mean, it's back to Microsoft's key message with enabling people to achieve more, I guess, isn't it? Where you're opening up the capabilities using that low code, no code to a broader, maybe even a slightly non-technical audience where they may not know some of these things.
That's the thing, is that because they're ultimately trying to put into the hands of those business people the tools that's going to make it easier for them to get the answers that they need. Yeah.
Sure.
So even in terms of automated machine learning, we're starting to see that a little bit more prevalent in a lot of these platforms, where they're baking in machine learning processes that you don't even know they're machine learning processes, because ultimately it's just a visualization that says, what would you like to know about? What would you like to predict? Maybe I can give you some descriptions about what has happened and what's going to happen. Yeah. Even without you knowing, from a business user perspective, that it's actually, machine learning algorithms in the background doing all this processing. Yeah. So I think, certainly over the next few years, there's definitely that kind of convergence of the business side and the technical side to be able to answer some of those data questions.
Yeah, I like your style, and I agree. I mean, even the small amount that I've seen with certain platforms and services starting to go those ways, it makes a lot of sense. So yeah, that's going to be an interesting thing to follow over the coming years, like you say, enabling more people to access these kinds of features and functionality.
Yes, and very easy to get into the hands of people as well. So watch the data space, because it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I think I used to say, echo people and colleagues had said to me that data was the new gold, but I got corrected not long ago by a guest on the show that said, actually, data's the new oil, where it's about, you've got this big well of data, but it's about refining that data and doing something with it using these platforms that you've described to us, Andy. I thought it was just a cool way of kind of describing the data space at the moment.
Yeah, and I think even that terminology is starting to move on as well.
Yeah.
In terms of it, but yes, it's the same thing. Yeah, it's an asset. At the end of the day, people could describe it however they want, but ultimately it is a business asset.
Andy, this has been such a fun, interesting conversation. Thanks so much for being an awesome guest and coming on and saying hello and describing what you're up to at the moment. It's certainly is an exciting area. Before we wrap up, any final parting words of wisdom?
Words of wisdom. Well, I think, I'd be a bit amiss if I didn't give a shout out to a conference. So a conference that I'm involved in organising, which is an Azure Synapse Analytics focus conference. So that's happening on the 9th of July on Saturday. So it's still quite a way away. It's called Data Toboggan. So, I tweet out, about that. So we're going to have a new website up soon. We've got a call for speakers open, which, yes, it's primarily in the Synapse Analytics side of things, but because there's a lot there as well, a lot of scope for people to bring their expertise to that. But yeah, I think, again, it's the be curious, right? It's that, if you're just starting out in data and you're looking at the platforms that Microsoft are developing, then get onto their Learn platform, have a look at some of the certifications, because some of those certifications can act as springboards into actually learning those as well. So instead of certifications being used as just a validation of your experience, they can actually be used as a springboard into that experience as well. So if you're coming at it new and you're having a little look around, have a look at some of the certifications, because they really distill down roles, and you can have a look through and you can see, well, what platforms are they using? What would I be expected to know? So it's a great way of getting involved.
Andy, that's awesome. And yeah, I think there's a lot of good takeaways, for people in the industry as well as those looking to come into the industry. So thanks once again for being an awesome guest. It's been really good fun. Thanks for joining me, Andy.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me on.
Nope. Speak to you soon. Thanks a lot.